I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about.
Okay, I think we're live. So great, we've made it. We've had a lot of fun with cameras because every time we set up in this special arrangement, interesting things seem to happen. So Jacqui, you are absolutely fine. You're in the screen now, and we can see you. The important thing is this is relaxed and chatty. You're in the inner sanctum of the UK column. And we take the opportunity to relax here and just be ourselves. So you're able to do the same. And if you've got a cup of coffee with you, that's good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're just let Debi. Sorry, I'm just going to move on through a couple of slides. Sorry, Debi. Hold on. You've got a little bit more that you wanted to just cover in extra time. So we'll give you the opportunity to do that, and then we'll get Jacqui talking. So there you are, NPR. Debi, what have you got?
Yeah, so I was watching the disasters that are unfolding in Gaza, and woke up to find out that all communications were down, and Tedros was speaking from the WHO, people from from UNRWA were talking, people from pretty much every aid organisation were saying that they were completely cut off and that they had no contact with any of their aid workers. No one had contact with anybody, which I thought was really strange, because if anybody would have a WHO preparedness plan, UN preparedness plan, why haven't they made plans for satellite phones, etc.? So I was really surprised when I was watching Al Jazeera and watching BBC, who were reporting live at the time from inside Gaza. So my brain wasn't calculating. It was like, why? How can they do that? But even if they can do that and they've got a satellite phone, why are they not offering that to the WHO or to the Red Cross or for humanitarian aid? Why are they broadcasting to my front room? So I sent a letter. I spoke to you, didn't I, Brian, about it? And you suggested that I wrote a letter to Tim Debi under Freedom of Information, which I did. And there's the letter just plainly saying, your reporter, Rishdi Abalouf, was talking direct from Han Yunis, Gaza, could be heard clearly. How were they managing to do that when there was a blackout everywhere else? And the interesting thing was the reply that I got, because I know that a lot of people had replied about the Andrew Bridgen debacle and all of those banners being shown on screen, and they all got a generic reply to their complaint quite quickly. However, mine has gone to the BBC legal team, information rights BBC legal team. So watch this space. I still don't know the answer, but Alex, I will let you know as soon as I hear.
Alex, what's your thought? I was very interested in this. I mean, obviously to communicate, they can have dedicated ground to satellite communication system, so I could easily understand they can communicate, but it does seem amazing they're so shy of this question that it goes through, it goes in as an FOI and the legal team.
Yes, it will depend on what their legal team as a whole, their legal department, understand by information rights, which will be the team within the legal department. I expect some of the other things they cover will be, can we disclose this information? And who has copyright over this information? So they probably do get their fair share of FOI requests. But how were you able to broadcast? It's quite a stretch to call that a matter of information rights in a legal sense, isn't it?
Yeah. As somebody else pointed out while we were doing the main part of the news, Tim Debi responded to me in an email saying that he got a lot of emails and therefore he couldn't respond to them all. So he was responding to me, yes, but he also chose not to answer my question. So I can't respond to you because I get so many emails, but I am responding.
The flunkies will do that for me. Yeah,
the flunkies, absolutely. Right. Okay. Well, there's a very interesting question, and I've got to also highlight. I found this business about the communications fascinating because, of course, the BBC, as we've just shown with Verify, was saying that people in Gaza were looking for instructions as to where they could go that was safe. And the principal communication for those messages from the Israeli side was coming over social media. And then we saw a couple of days ago that the whole of the the internet network had gone down or been taken down. So that channel to warn people of raids coming in had been taken away from them. Now,
you know, the right man to talk about this in more detail, if we can get hold of him again, is former Ambassador Peter Ford, who, although being better known for having been our ambassador in Bahrain and especially then in Damascus, had a spell with UNRWA on the Palestinian issue. So whether he was in Gaza or simply had good comms with them, he will certainly be able to tell us what the state of communication was some years ago.
Yes. That's a really good idea. We'll see what we can do on that, Alex. So, Debi, very quickly, because I want to get back over to Jacqui as our guest today. But what was the other material we got here about the NHS data?
Yeah, well, just very quickly, with all that Ben's been saying, obviously, about Palantir, and we know a lot about Palantir, none of it good. It was interesting to see on Laura Kunsberg's show, although that was hosted by Victoria Derbyshire this week, Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir, who says that the sale of the NHS data is up to the government, and basically they get away scot-free. Of course, there's nothing to see here, nothing to worry about Palantir. It was a very disturbing piece, actually. So if anybody hasn't seen it, have a look at it. And then NHS virtual wards as well. We're now going to be treating thousands of patients at home that have heart failure. So virtual wards, we know, are basically, it's your bedroom, your bed. So that's a little NHS story. And then a good story this week, I think, and very significant in that the plans to close the ticket offices has all fallen apart. And now, thank goodness, thanks to a public consultation. So well done, everybody. You see, it does make a difference. Well done, because now we'll still get ticket offices. And of course, for the vulnerable, elderly and disabled, these are absolutely vital. I know that there's been a lot of talk about the COVID inquiry, and I will touch on the COVID inquiry when it comes to Dominic Cummings and all that's been going on in the last couple of days. But a few days ago, a top civil servant couldn't recall why he turned on his WhatsApp disappearing messages during COVID. Highly suspicious, don't you think? Because he was in the Dominic Cummings era. And if you go to the next screenshot, I mean, just feel free to freeze the screen, but it's all very strange. Why would he switch the disappearing message function off? Very strange.
Well,
and then finally, I just
can't think, Debi, that's such a difficult question, why he would do that.
Isn't it?
Do you think it might be connected with wanting messages to disappear?
I think so, yeah. I do actually think the evidence is just gone in a puff of smoke. But of course, we know Dominic Cummings is having a lot to say, so I will report on that next week. Right. But my final little story, well, actually, there's two final little stories, but my first final little story is the smallest little police station has now opened in Crawley. Apparently there's been a spate of stabbings, and this little booth, which is really no bigger than a TARDIS, like one of the old blue police boxes, this has opened in Crawley in response to the stabbings. Well, I'm not quite sure what happens if there's somebody in there all the time, or if you have to knock on the door or whatever, but that's probably a sign of things to come. And on a final note, actually, the final note has to be to me, because apparently I'm hunkered down already. As you know, I'm a flood victim. So we're hunkered down for Storm Kieran, which is about to hit us in the next few hours, tonight, tomorrow. So if I'm flooded this time next week, Southwest Water, I'm watching you. But apparently straight after Storm Kieran, Storm Debi is on the way. And it's even spelt the same way as my name, Debi. So Storm Debi is set to make landfall this weekend. And I just want Southwest Water to know I'm watching you.
All right, thanks for that. Well, Jacqui, let's come back over to you, and thank you very much for joining in for extra time. You gave us a lot of information in that little run through. I'll just start off. I'm sure Alex has got some questions as well, but how have you found the people who came to you with their stories about what's gone on? What were they saying to you? Why did they come to you?
Why did they come to me? They'd seen me. I'd started writing about it for the alternative media and did quite a few interviews on various shows about it. So people would see it, and then word got round, and then they started contacting me. And before I knew it, I'd spoken to hundreds and hundreds of people. Not all of them wanted to be in the group that I'd set up, obviously. Some people actually come into the group and then have to leave because they're not ready to be in that sort of group setting, especially if their loved ones have been killed recently. In the group, we use the word killed and murdered. I don't even know why the word euthanasia exists, because euthanasia, involuntary euthanasia, is murder. And if you help to euthanize someone, you'll get the same sort of jail sentence as if you attempt to kill someone. If you actually succeed in euthanizing someone, you can get the same jail sentence as you'd get for murder, for up to life. So I don't really know. It's just like a sugar-coated sort of euphemism, I suppose, euthanasia. I suppose most people see it as something voluntary, but there are the two different types. There's voluntary and involuntary. So involuntary, to me, is just murder. And this is what's been happening, and not just in care homes and hospitals, but also in hospices and sometimes in people's own homes.
Yeah. And of course, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and these people who come to me are absolutely in a state of, shock and devastation. Like I said earlier, it's not just grannies and granddads and mums and dads. It's people who've lost their wives and husbands, people who've lost their adult children and even their children. And one person in the group talks about their grandchild was euthanized in hospital, which is absolutely horrendous. This person was only 17 years old. So it's really hard to imagine the trauma, that these people have been through, and the ripple effect of these crimes, and they are crimes, is immense. Not only have they lost the people who are really dear to them, but their own lives are now in tatters. Many of them are unable to work. They just can't function. They can't sleep. They're on medication for insomnia, depression, anxiety. Some of them are falling apart, and they are finding it hard to go on. Some of them have lost jobs. They've lost their friends, and their family all think they're mad because they're obsessed with getting the truth and justice. It's a terrible situation. It has a terrible, far-reaching effect. It's not just one. I'm saying just one person, but it's not a person being killed in hospital. It's not just that person that's affected. It's everyone around them.
Right. And of course, there was one Romanian lady, Elena, that Debbie and I came into contact with, and she I understand that she's been a key supporter of what you're doing and the group. So for Debbie and myself, that was first-hand interaction with a family that had gone through this sort of grief. And of course, that case alone was just horrific.
If you're crooked, you really don't want to mess with a Romanian on anything medical, because in my experience, they've got the best medical understanding of a whole population anywhere in the world. They're up there with the Russians. They really know their stuff.
Yeah, Elena is actually a nurse as well. So she knew exactly what happened to her husband, Stuart. And I've spent a lot of time with Elena. She's in my new film, Playing God. I'm still in the final stages of crowdfunding for that. We filmed it. We're almost finished the editing, but we still need to raise some more funds to get it out there to everyone. Elena tells her whole story in the documentary. Her story is absolutely shocking. Her husband was only 54. He was chemically and physically restrained in the hospital. She wasn't allowed to see him until the day that they planned to execute him. They executed him in front of her while she had him in her arms. And it's just like, and just to add insult to injury, they actually, when she got his notes, she found that he'd been given more drugs after the date of death. So she doesn't even want to think about that, what that means. So, you can only guess what that might mean. Why it had been recorded that he'd been given more midazolam, more morphine. He'd already been given hundreds of milligrams of it by this point. But why would they give it to someone after their death? Doesn't make any sense. The only option, well, there are several options, but most of them she doesn't really want to even think about. But the thing is, like I said, a lot of these people feel they can't go on, but quite ironically, it's their fury and their upset that keeps them going. Some of them are going legal or trying to, but the problem is when a lot of people say, oh, why don't they go to the police? Well, most people do go to the police in this situation. The police do not want to know. Lawyers don't want to help. Very, very few lawyers will even touch this sort of stuff because they'll be up against not only the NHS, but the government, because it's the government that hands down these protocols to the NHS. So once the lawyers realise that, they back away. And some lawyers have said, well, the hospitals have done nothing wrong because they're following the protocols, they're following the nice guidelines.
They weren't listening in their first term at law school then, were they, about what their job is? If they come out with the government can do what it likes. Yeah.
So they don't want to risk it. It's too risky for them. And as we know, there's these no win, no fee things. They don't even seem to exist anymore. But I know that if they do think they've got less than a 50% chance of winning, they're not even going to enter into that kind of arrangement. So many times I've wanted to stop as well. I've had stuff going on in my life that kind of has been difficult at times, and I just think, but every time I get drawn back into it by another person coming to me with another story, and you can't. I just feel I can't let these people down.
And Jacqui, it's not just taking information and investigating the story, is it? Because these people, the moment they start to interact and speak, they actually need counselling. They need support, and that I know is another. I'm going to call it a burden. That sounds a bit unkind, but that's the reality of it. That when you've got terribly distressed people, when you try and help them, you've got to deal with them on several different levels. You're trying to get information, but also you're trying to comfort them and to keep them going and keep them fighting. And this can be a very, very onerous, very tiring thing to do. So I'm sure it's put you under a lot of pressure from that aspect alone.
I'm not alone because within the group now, people are all talking to each other and helping each other and supporting each other, and they're all at different stages of their journey. Some people have just lost someone, other people lost someone years ago, and they're all kind of helping and advising and supporting each other and sharing information. So a couple of people have gone legal and they are progressing with it. We were kind of hoping at some point to get maybe some kind of class action or group litigation order, I think it's called in this country, if possible. So we're looking into that. But these things cost money, and they're hoping. The people who've come up with these policies, they're just hoping that I think I said earlier that the people who are victim to them, they will give up or run out of money or die, preferably, before it gets anywhere near a courtroom.
That's like the VDPS, isn't it? The Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme, to string people out and give them the idea that they won't be able to jump through all the hoops.
Yeah. And my second film, Playing God, is a kind of broader look at medical democide in the UK, again, over the last 50 years. So it's giving people a platform. One of the main contributors is Joan Bye, who I think you've had on UK Column before. And she's been fighting for justice since 1978, when her daughter, her 12-year-old daughter, Eleanor, was killed in hospital, used as a guinea pig, basically, for a new drug called Epilim. And like I said, it's just terrible. I call this recent spate of culling the Midazolam murders. A lot of people refer to it as that, but it's not just Midazolam that they're using. The other thing I forgot to mention earlier was that this cocktail of drugs is used in some states in America as an execution recipe, I suppose.
Jacqui, it was Dr. Mark Jones was the first person who talked to me about that. And at the time he told me, it just seemed difficult to get your head around it. But of course, it was absolutely factually, it was correct.
Yeah, the indicated protocol in intensive care is, if it's used correctly at the proper dose, is as I understand it, is people who would otherwise, not be able to maintain steady breathing because of trauma, shock, or whatever else, are being kept in this subdued consciousness precisely so their body has a fighting chance. But that's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because that medicine can very easily be misused to suppress people's breathing when they're trying to live.
Well, that's
the whole idea.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's the whole idea of morphine and midazolam. Midazolam is an opioid. Morphine is an opioid, and midazolam is a benzodiazepine. So when you use these two drugs in conjunction with each other, it will automatically depress that person's respirations. So if somebody has a respiratory illness or respiratory disease or is struggling breathing, then that will depress their respirations. What a lot of nurses told me that was going on in hospitals was that they were using midazolam and morphine, they thought quite fairly, to put people on respirators, because obviously people would have to be sedated. It's a very scary procedure going onto a respirator, that you need to put a tube down into the throat and intubate that patient and breathe for them. So many were given midazolam and morphine, and of course this just knocked off their breathing even more.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the excuse that massive order in early 2020 was for that is a nonsense, because of course the ventilators were stopped being used quite early on. I think it was January 21. So, and it seems to me that most of the killings were in 2021. I can see that.
This is Dr. Luke's notorious good death section, isn't it? It's a question session. I mean, how Hancock thought he could avoid that coming to light, that the whole of the free media was abuzz with that good death exchange. How he can then say to a court, I'd never heard of the drug. That takes some chutzpah, doesn't it?
It really, really does. I mean, that exchange is shocking, and it's probably the first time a lot of people have heard the phrase "a good death," which is
simply the translation of euthanasia.
Yeah, from the Greek word euthanatos, which means a happy death or a good death, and it's a euphemism basically, just to kind of soften the blow.
The word was appropriated. I mean, in the Puritan days, there were books entitled euthanasia, but it was about preparing yourself spiritually to meet your maker. And the idea was have a long, happy and fulfilled life and be prepared to die when the time comes.
Yeah.
And sometime around the Rockefeller early 20th century medical takeover, it gets appropriated in the same way as eugenics, proper breeding gets appropriated to mean let's dispatch you mercifully.
Yeah, I mean, what a lot of people don't realise is it's not a happy death at all. The midazolam sedates the person so they look calm and peaceful, but on the inside, it's not calm and peaceful at all. It's a horrible, horrible death. That's why several states in the US stopped using it as an execution drug, because it was too barbaric. And these people it was prolonged torture. That's what it's actually known as, prolonged torture, which no one should have to go through in any situation, especially if you're an innocent person who's not even at the end of your life. This is a lot of the misconceptions. Oh, it's old people. It's people who are terminally ill that are given these drugs. When I spoke to one editor back in 2021 and was telling her the whole story, this was an editor at the Telegraph, she said to me, but, this isn't really a story because everyone knows that this is happening. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, everyone knows that people at the end of life in ICU get a little bit of a helping hand. And I'm like, well, that's a story in itself, because that is illegal if that is happening, Well, I know it's happening. But this editor was kind of saying, but, it's not a big deal. It happens to loads of people. What's the problem? And I was like, taken aback by that response. And that is how a lot of people, especially younger people, think now. They think, oh, it's okay. But even if you are terminally ill, even if you are 100 years old, that doesn't mean that someone else has got the right to hasten your death and end your life.
No.
We've mentioned Dr. Mark Jones for our newer viewers. He's a gentleman in Chester who addressed a 2017 conference of ours called Dying for Good Health that you'll find on the website. And you'll also find an interview called The Mechanics of Modern Murder, which she did with Brian and several other people. Brian interviewed several others for it. But without getting involved in the horrendous details there, the key point is it was completely separate from COVID, before COVID, Midazolam, as Jacqui said, was not the means used. But here's the bit that interests me, Jacqui, is do you see anything financial popping out here in the sense that Dr. Mark Jones did? He was quite certain that between crooked lawyers looking at the wills and some very wicked nurses in some of the care homes, there was an agreement at a local level. Okay, this one's got a ripe estate, so string out the care, and when the estate turns into debts, we're going to suffocate them. And it would take the form, according to him, and there's enough testimony of it, of withholding food and drink, letting them thirst away, or suffocating them with a pillow.
Yeah,
right. And that was all described in great detail by Mark and several others, not just from Chester, but that was a particular cluster that was well bottomed out by the mid 2010s. In this COVID round, do you see the same thing happening, even if it's only at the level of NHS managers thinking, you're the kind of person who's going to cost the government a lot?
It's absolutely all about the money. And quite strangely, when I was making the film A Good Death in 2021, I didn't prompt anyone. There was no script. I hadn't met some of the people before even. I just went to their house, sat down, chatted to them. Every single one of them said, when I said, why do you think this is happening? They all said money. And a lot of people I know have looked into it now. An excellent researcher called Stuart Wilkie can speak at length on this as well. It's absolutely all about the money. So just take, for example, my dad, whose life was brought to an abrupt halt in September 2021. I just worked out that if he was to live another 20 years, which he should have done, he was 78 when he was when his life ended, and they've saved £500,000 on him alone. That's just in his various pensions that he's got coming in. Ironically, he had a pension from the NHS as well as a state pension and from the council. So, because he's worked in various roles. So, so that's just on one person.
And Jacqui, we're one of the very few media platforms, thanks to Mike, who has a great financial mind and ability to represent it graphically. We're one of the very few who've done a total pie chart some years ago with a great big yellow slice, a third of the pie, 4 trillion or so. This is our biggest liability, or the government's rather, unfunded liability, pensions. What are we going to do? And Mike asked that question open-endedly. No one was able to answer it.
Yeah, well, they're dealing with that right now, aren't they? So, and there was actually a rather joyful little story reported by the BBC back in 2021, saying how they're saving millions and millions of pounds now. All the old people are dying of COVID. Obviously, we knew then, and a lot of people know now, these people weren't dying of some faux virus. They were actually being euthanized. And yes, they are spending lots of money, so they must be very, very pleased with themselves. The plan is working.
Right. This is the same generation, young professionals, millennials, who I won't tar them all with the same brush, but they like saying, I'm a speck of stardust and I'm just a bag of meat. And I'm only here for, traditional religion also and morality also says, I am only here for the blink of an eye. But the meaning of that is make the most of it for other people and have a fulfilled life. But now it's become, in meat space, in the real world, I'm just a blob of dirt. I don't really count for much. And, hence you get immediately this running through to public health. We take a One Health approach, which is just nice language for we don't matter that much more than bacteria.
Well, this is something that's been pushed upon us for the last 500 years, that we're descendants of monkeys on a spinning space ball, and that we're totally insignificant, and the vastness of everything around us makes us even more insignificant. And there's also this weird kind of death, I don't know what to call it really, a death cult amongst younger people, where if someone dies, even in their immediate circle, there's no kind of real emotion or feeling about it. It's just kind of like, oh, R.I.P., whoever it is, and lots of social media, and it's, I don't know, something very strange has happened with the reporting in mainstream media as well about all the the sudden and unexpected deaths in the last couple of years. They don't even say why the person has died or what they've died of half the time. And I know as a journalist for the last 38 years that if I'd submitted a story and didn't have those essential details in about someone's death, it would be thrown right back at me. These days the stories are very half-baked. And if you dare to ask anything, oh, well, what happened to the person? What did they die of? You're suddenly some like ghoul or something. That's the word that a lot of the Twitter bots like to use.
Final question from me, to make sure it goes in the show notes, Jacqui. What is the website, if there is one already, where people can donate to help you make the film?
For the Playing God film, we're doing the final phase of the crowdfunding now, just so we can get the film out there. We just need one more little push. And it's on Crowdfunder, Playing God UK. It will pop up if you type that in. And you can
I'll
donate.
make sure that's in the show notes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.
One thing before, I think I'd just like to add that we've heard from so many people that are frightened now to go to the NHS. They're frightened if their relatives are in the NHS. And I was in that position myself when a very close relative had to go into hospital for heart surgery. And I was very worried that because she was very elderly, there was going to be a DNR put on her notes, and that maybe after the procedure, I would get a phone call from someone to say that she'd passed. So she told the hospital that basically I, as a trained nurse, was watching them. And we've heard from many other people saying that when they've gone into hospital or needed to go into hospital, they've made a point of saying their relative is either a paralegal, a solicitor, a nurse, a doctor, a paramedic.
Or an academic. That has got some...
to specifically say, I am not consenting to a DNR being put on my notes. Make the statement, ask the question, always ask the question, because if you ask the question and they know that they're watching you, that you're watching them. And the other thing to do that we've said many times before, if you are frightened, is to make a living will. And there's plenty of references to that in my blogs. If you just put living will into the search bar, it should come up with the details.
Debbie, about half a year ago, didn't you have in your blog once that somebody described that they just made up on the spur of the moment in a bedside conversation with an arrogant consultant, I am Professor Smith. Oh, bow scrape, you are of the professional classes. Oh, yes, I'll treat you decently then.
Yeah.
Alex,
exactly that. And but even when Eleanor, as a trained nurse, did it, I mean, she had... The interview, by the way, on the column is called No Time to Grieve, if anybody wants to look at Eleanor's incredible, most moving video. But she explained, too, that while she didn't have any time to grieve, she also felt the guilt. And it's the guilt that so many of these relatives are feeling, because what could we have done something better? Could we have stopped it? Could we have said something? So, say you're a paralegal, say you're a professor, say you're a nurse, say one of your family is. And then they do seem to realise or acknowledge that somebody is watching them. We shouldn't have to do it. I think that's an idea.
Of course not. I've got to come back in because we're at the end of our time. I'm going to say, Jacqui, thank you very much for joining us today. I'd like that this particular extra time is made public as well, because normally it's for subscribers, but I think this should be made public. We'll make sure that your sites go up, as Alex has said, so that we can encourage people to get involved with the crowdfunder. And of course, the other thing that we've talked about is getting some of these people to join us in a UK column event, so that they can tell their own stories, because I think that's where the power is. But we're certainly going to do more with you, but I've just got to say very nicely, we're out of time today.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Alex and Debbie, thank you very much as well for joining us. And we just say to our audience, serious topics, but we're all adults. We need to speak about this. We need to understand what's happening, because if we don't understand what's happening, we can't do anything about it. So we need a good storm, Debbie, to whip these people up and get them paying attention. I'll leave it to you and storm Debbie. Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.